Good morning. Good morning. The microphone's working well?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Well, I want to welcome all of you ladies and gentlemen to the International and North American Conference, the USAEE IAEE Conference for 2016. My name is Jim Smith, President of the United States Association for Energy Economics, and I'm glad to see a great turnout today. And last night I had a chance to meet a number of you. It's not every year that we schedule the opening reception against a Nobel Prize winner, Bob Dylan, who played in town last night. So it was a great sacrifice on all of your parts to participate, and for those of you that went to the Bob Dylan concert, it was a great sacrifice, I'm sure, to get up this morning and join us for this early session. So it's much appreciated. We have several dignitaries at the head table today I want to introduce, and we have a few opening remarks, and then we have a very interesting plenary session immediately to follow. Mr. Gurkan Kambaroglu is the president of the International Association of Energy Economics. Next to him, Ron Ripple, who is the local organizing chairman for the conference here at Tulsa. And at the end of the table, we have Tom Robbins from the state of Oklahoma. And so we welcome all of you and thank you for what you've done to help put on the conference today. I especially want to welcome the 25 new members of the USAEE who have joined to participate in this conference, and we hope that you'll find it to be an interesting and worthwhile two and a half days worth of sessions. It's a great time to come and think about energy policy, think about the markets, think about the future. There's so many dynamic elements going on, and if you've taken a look at the program, you'll, I think, see that we have touched a lot of those bases, and I look forward to those sessions. I want to thank Tom Drennan, who has organized the plenary sessions that we'll be sitting in. And I want to thank Betty Simpkins and Mike Troilo, who have organized the concurrent sessions for this conference. John Holding has organized the poster session, which we'll be enjoying later on this evening. And the case competition, which has already been conducted, was organized by Parth Vaishnav, who I thank very much. And I particularly want to thank the financial sponsors of the case competition. CAPSARC, the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, has been a good supporter of that program. And I want to just take a note here that next year we've decided to open that up to international competition. So at the conference in Houston next fall, we'll have an international case competition and look forward to that very much. We have a number of sponsors that have helped make this a successful conference. That's largely due to the efforts of Sonia Carley, who's in the audience here, and Tina Vital, who led the sponsorship committee this year. And so we thank you very much for that. There's a large number of people to thank on the program committee. We've printed their names on page 12 of the program. I'm not going to read all of those, but everyone has played an important role here. I do want to mention Melanie Craxton, who is our student representative. She's organized both social media and on-site events for the students that I think will be a vital part of the student experience, and appreciate that. Of course, we always thank Administrative Management Services, Dave Williams and his teams, for helping us mount these conferences every year. The financial sponsors, and we wouldn't be here without their support. I want to mention each one of them: the American Petroleum Institute, the Aramco Services Company, Benjamin Schlesinger and Associates, BP, Conoco, Enbridge, ExxonMobil, the Grand River Dam Authority. Some of you went on that tour yesterday. Mr. John Holding, Laredo Petroleum, Macor, Next Decade, Oil, Gas, and Energy Law, Penn State University, Jim Plummer, Public Service Company of Oklahoma, the Resolve Energy, the Baker Institute at Rice University, Shell Energy, Southern Company, the University of Tulsa College of Business, and last but not least, Saudi Aramco. So let's give a round of applause to all of those. I also wanted to thank you that attended or participated in the case competition yesterday. The results of that will be announced later in the conference. And also I want to thank all of the students and the student mentors that participated this morning in the mentoring sessions, which is a continuing feature of our conferences. We're doing something new this year that I know some of you will want to partake in, and that is what we refer to as the inaugural government track of sessions. We have crafted together 3 sessions of particular interest, focusing on the transition from one government to the next. Of course, the election's coming up, and those sessions are going to be featuring the particular issues that are at the forefront, both of the government staffers in the agencies, the government officers, the other stakeholders, and these sessions will focus on different aspects of how the transitions go, what the uncertainties are, how we can think about the unexpected things that might happen when a government changes over. These sessions will be occupying a slot in the first 3 concurrent session periods beginning later this morning. And if you're wondering how you or your agency or your company might be affected in the energy sphere during the upcoming transition, you're certainly invited to attend one of those sessions. We have speakers that are current or former high officials in the Department of Energy, Department of Interior, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the presidential transition teams, both for President George W. Bush and Barack Obama. So we've got a wealth of experience, people that have worked through this type of situation. I welcome all of you that want to partake of those sessions. They're highlighted in the program. And I also particularly want to thank the 3 individuals that have pulled this together, and that would be Abe Haspel, Arnie Baker, and Kim Kaufman. They've done yeoman's work to pull this off, and we intend this to be a continuing element of the future conferences, that we feature sessions that focus in particular on the government contribution and the government interaction in energy markets. It's one of the 3 pillars of our association, so we know that's important. Just a couple more comments before I turn this over to the other members of the head table. I want you to be aware that there is a map in the inside cover of your program for the concurrent sessions. They're partly on this floor, they're partly on the floor up above us, and so make sure you know where you're going. I noticed that escalator is still frozen this morning, so you might allow yourself a little more time if you want to get to a session upstairs this morning. With that, I want to introduce Gürkan Kamberoglu, the president of the IAEE. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everybody. Dear delegates, dear colleagues, friends, students, members of the IAEE, of the USAEE, existing members and incoming members new with this conference. Let me begin with an expression of thanks to the United States Association for Energy Economics and the team at Tulsa University for organizing the 34th USAEE IAEE North American Conference. The International Association for Energy Economics is growing. We've reached almost 4,500 members and are advancing rapidly towards our next milestone with new affiliates and conferences in new regions. Being based in Turkey myself, it has been my ambition and passion to take the IAEE flag to new countries around Turkey in particular and enlarge our membership in the Eurasian region with focus on the Caucasus and Eastern Europe, the Balkans. we are now expanding actively in Eastern Europe, where we had almost no presence. Earlier this year, we have established the Greek affiliate, the Hellenic Association for Energy Economics, with a most successful inaugural conference. Another successful inaugural conference was held in Slovenia earlier this year. And our newly established Slovenian affiliate turned out to be very active and even organized its second international affiliate event within the same year, 2 weeks ago. Albania, Bulgaria, Croatia are within our next target countries in the Balkans. As you are aware of, IAEE started a new regional conference series this year called the Eurasian Conference. We were faced with great difficulty and challenges in the planning phase. But our event in Baku turned out to be so successful that we've received an invitation from the state oil company of Azerbaijan for a repeat performance next year. We now have many enthusiastic IAEE supporters and members from the Caspian region and have planted the seeds for a new regional affiliate that is likely to get established next year. The Middle East, with its vast oil and gas resources, has been a region of interest to the global energy economy since the discovery of these resources, essentially for over a century. We've been discussing issues related to the region since the foundation of IAEE, yet have very weak presence in the region, except Saudi Arabia. So we also target the Middle East as an emerging region for our outreach activities. We've been having interaction with Egypt, Qatar, and Israel. And I'm delighted to announce that there has been very good progress with Israel. Within the Israeli Energy and Business Convention, coming up on November 21, 22, we plan to launch our Israeli affiliate with the participation of the Israeli Minister of Energy. IAEE expands in the Middle East, a region of great importance for the energy world, at a violent and unstable time. No, we don't have plans for Iraq and Syria. Not yet. But we've identified a strategic development plan to invest in Africa and India, aiming to contribute to the reduction of energy poverty. Advancing the knowledge, promoting the understanding and the application of economics across all aspects of energy policy issues and problems and opportunities remains our cardinal code of conduct. As IAEE, we are policy neutral, but our products and services have a significant influence on energy policy. That's the beauty of IAEE. From an economic perspective, we can tell what's right, but we are not responsible when it goes wrong. When IAEE was founded in 1977, the United States experienced shortages of gasoline and other petroleum products because of reduced domestic oil production and greater dependence on imported oil. Today, 49 years later, we are at the opposite extreme and gathered together here in Tulsa to discuss the implications of North American energy self-sufficiency. That's great. But whatever happens, IAEE is always there with a global perspective. With a global perspective because we're discussing the implications of North American energy self-sufficiency in other parts of the world as well at our events, and particularly implications on the region where the event is being held. This makes us a truly global association. And our conferences worldwide provide a unique opportunity to discuss such global issues with its primary local actors. we've got a brand new service to further facilitate the interaction and exchange with experienced IAEE members. It's called the IAEE Speakers Bureau. Members of the public at large can search the IAEE website to find knowledgeable and skilled speakers for their events from among designated IAEE members who are willing to share their experience. Continuing with latest developments, I'd like to announce the appointment of Christian von Hirschhausen from Technical University Berlin as our new editor-in-chief of EEP, the Economics of Energy and Environmental Policy journal, for a 5-year period starting from September 1 this year. I'm also delighted to let you know that our summer school concept that we started last year in Istanbul turned out to be a great success. Having repeated the summer school both in Turkey and China twice successfully, we've already started planning for next year's events in these two countries. I wish each and every one of you a most enriching, pleasant conference, and would like to invite Ron Ripple, IAEE Vice President for Conferences and Facilitator of the Tulsa Conference, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Gurkan. My opening remarks are going to be relatively brief. I want to thank, as Jim did, the program committee. I'm really pleased that all of you have made it here to Tulsa. I've only lived in Tulsa now for about 3.5 years, but I really enjoy the city. I very much enjoy the university, who's one of our platinum sponsors for this year's conference. And I'm really happy to be able to invite you all to come to Tulsa and enjoy what I've found to be a really terrific city and great surrounding environments. While Jim has already thanked all of our sponsors, I'd particularly like to thank API for its support for the technical tour that will go on Thursday to include Enbridge facilities in Cushing, an operating production lease just outside of Cushing, and then back here to Tulsa, to the University of Tulsa's North Campus, where we conduct state-of-the-art petroleum engineering research I'm an economist. These engineers do really cool stuff up there. It's great. And if you are at all interested in that tour, we still have a few seats available on the bus. But we only have until about noon tomorrow to be able to give the final list to the folks at Enbridge who are requiring a list of folks so they can check through security and stuff along the way. As Jim noted, we did have our tour yesterday that was sponsored and put on for us by the Grand River Dam Authority. It was an outstanding tour. There were 16 of us, I think, that enjoyed that. They provided us with a great deal of interesting information about how the electricity production system that they operate operates in this part of the country. I'm an oil and gas guy, but I learned an awful lot about the power sector there. GRDA runs 2 coal-fired plants. They just have a new state-of-the-art natural gas combined cycle plant that is nearing completion of construction, will be up and operating next year. And then they have 3 hydro systems, including a fairly unusual pump storage operation. There are only a handful of pump storage operations in the country, and we have one here, which was very enlightening. I'd like to also bring to your attention, highlight the fact that we have 2 workshops that follow the conference, one on induced seismicity and the other is on energy risk. And also to highlight the Tuesday lunch, tomorrow's lunch. Our keynote speaker at lunch is the Secretary of Energy and Environment for Oklahoma, Michael Teague, and he will talk to us about the induced seismicity that is being experienced here in Oklahoma. I was telling some people this morning that when my wife and I moved here from Australia, she was first a little concerned that I had brought her to Tornado Alley, and then right after we got here, we also found that we were now in the most seismically active part of the country. I think she really wonders about some of my decision choices on occasion, but she really loves Tulsa as well, so that's good. Mike's talk tomorrow should be very, very informative and enlightening, and in particular for those who are planning on going to the induced seismicity workshop. It will give you a really good, solid foundation on what has been happening and what the state and other entities are doing to help figure out how we might be able to mitigate that. I'd like to note also that our plenary sessions, if you really you look at them, you look at the people that are presenting, and you think about what the topics are of those, they are all very much in line with the theme of our conference that's looking at the implications of North American energy self-sufficiency. And I think you'll find those very informative as well. And I'd like to thank all of our plenary session chairs. I'm not going to read through the full list. You can see those in the program as well. But they've spent a lot of time working with their respective speakers and organizing this so that it'll be very informative for all of us. I've been asked to make sure that I have the delegates go to the online conference evaluation, and please fill that out and let us know what we've done well, let us know what we haven't done perfectly so that we can fix it the next time and so on. I'd like to say that we were going to have Tulsa's Mayor Dewey Bartlett here this morning. He was unable to join us, but he's an oil man himself with a long history in his family in the energy sector, and he's clearly a very strong proponent not only of the city of Tulsa but also the energy sector and its involvement and its importance to the city. With that, what I'd like to do is introduce our next speaker, who is Mr. Tom Robbins. He is the Deputy Secretary of Energy here in Oklahoma. Mike Teague, who's speaking tomorrow, is his boss. I'm sure he'll be able to give us some good information as well about how the energy industry is important and relevant to not only Tulsa but to Oklahoma and the rest of the region and the nation. Tom has both experience as a government executive, but also he's worked extensively in the energy industry before moving on to government. And with that, I would like to bring Tom to the podium, and thank you. And please enjoy.
Okay, welcome. It's a prerequisite for anybody who wants to come to the state of Oklahoma to at least be introduced, if they're not familiar already, with Oklahoma's favorite son and experience some of the witty insight of Will Rogers. And given the current state of politics and the presidential race, it's not hard to find a Will Rogers quote that sort of zings what's happening. So I wanted to share one with you this morning. He said, quote, "There's no trick to being a humorist when you have the whole government working for you." So we've got a group of economists here to answer the question. Some of you guys probably have run some models or looked at some interesting poll numbers. To answer the question, who on election day will be victorious? Who will be the winner? The answer is simple: Saturday Night Live. It certainly can be frustrating as we look at the sort of state of play of the presidential race. But for decades, president after president, regardless of party, has called for America to be energy independent. They've also called for initiatives, blue ribbon commissions, committees, ever-changing federal standards. And ultimately, this vision of energy independence has remained largely, as you know, elusive. As the majors left the U.S. for newer fields and opportunities in distant shores and far-off lands, it has been up until literally this last decade, particularly the last 5 years, where this has changed. As energy entrepreneurs, many of whom were working right here in Oklahoma, saw the potential for a new technology to unleash the power of shale oil and natural gas, finally cracking the code. And that has led to a revolution right here in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, it's in total, oil and gas industry supports an estimated $65.7 billion in state output. Almost 1 in 5 jobs of wage and salary workers or the self-employed or proprietaries are tied in Oklahoma to the oil and gas industry. And in 2015, and I put this as a caveat, I did not receive a single penny of this, but an estimated $1.7 billion in oil and gas royalties were paid in Oklahoma. Crude in 2015 had a 157% increase from 2005, that decade, scaling up to 157.8 million barrels of crude production, and state natural gas output reached 2.5 trillion cubic feet in 2015. So ultimately, truly, this is a revolution. Now, the past 2 years have been challenging. Oklahoma has been impacted by the steep decline in commodity prices. I can remember sitting at my desk at Chesapeake Energy and knowing that we were producing so much. In the news, it was announced that President Obama had ordered that some bombs be directed to counteract the threat of ISIS. Now, typically, when that would happen, obviously in the Middle East region, and you attach the United States military might doing something, what would you expect energy prices to do? I remember I looked at the crude price, and that day it actually had a downtick. So even before OPEC met and had that historic meeting where they just basically said we're going to keep the foot on the gas, you knew that we were being oversupplied by some of the just news that was happening to have that event happen in the Middle East. Personally, myself and my family last October were impacted by these prices as E&P companies needed to cut G&A or corporate expenses, read costly employees. So these stats aren't just numbers, they're personal. Given that perspective, let me just throw out a policy idea since I have a room full of economists. Decades after decade, there's a little bit something that's familiar. We go from boom to bust, boom to bust, boom to bust. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say in future decades with this bold prediction, we'll continue to have boom to bust, boom to bust, boom to bust. Hopefully, we're at the beginning of a trend upward in this current sort of bust that we're in, but that future will happen and that cycle will play itself out again and again. With every bust, just like this one, thousands of highly trained technical employees are laid off. Those with transfer skills, I've noticed particularly in the IT area, were absorbed in other industries across the state and in the broader economy. However, highly technical employees whose education experience is more closely associated with the oil and gas industry almost overnight changed from working productively to being without employment. Geologists, geophysicists, reservoir petroleum engineers, just to name a few, who found themselves caught in this squeeze among the boom and bust cycle. As economists, you know that one of the worst things you can have is a paid-for asset that stops generating or stops producing output that's productive just with its past education and experience already paid for because the market can no longer utilize that skill set. Knowing that we will have future boom to bust, and that with every large bust, there's a group of highly technical employees, thousands of them in this case, that show up in the market, we must plan for what to do. One idea would be that in the years of plenty, if you want to call them that, in the boom part of the cycle, additional federal funding be given to the national energy labs, and that money set aside, and memorandums of understanding, MOUs, are put into place now with the country's great oil and gas producing states within their universities. Projects that require the expertise of geologists, geophysicists, reservoir and petroleum engineers, but whose labor can't be easily afforded during the boom part of the cycle, who are then available for hire on temporary contract by these labs with these universities during the bust. They could work on projects that are already in the queue and that have waiting funding at oil and gas research institutions of which many of you represent. This would allow the country and its great oil and gas universities to continue in partnership with the National Energy Labs to use these educated, seasoned, trained assets to develop technologies needed to support America's energy research. So I just throw that out there for you all. I would also like to say this, is that OPEC is obviously trying to crush the American shale oil and gas revolution. And they have slowed it. In some places it's become economical and it's come to a grinding halt. We have a few of those plays in Oklahoma. However, what I think they do not understand in doing this, because they have slowed down the market and have forced particularly major oil and gas producers with their service company providers to slow down and to focus instead of to punch holes to hold by production. They're able to work to get their technology in a place that they're able to get higher yields. I bring to your attention just 2-3 days ago, Chesapeake Energy had their analyst day, the first one in 2 years, and they have this quote from Jason Pygott, who I know a little bit. He's very mild manners, which makes this quote even more fun. Chesapeake Energy said Thursday, according to Bloomberg, that at an analyst conference, it had set a record for fracking by pumping more than 25 tons of sand down one Louisiana natural gas well, a process the shale driller christened Propageddon. I love that. This supersized dose of sand known as proppant is able to prop open even bigger, more numerous cracks in the rock for oil and gas to flow. Output from these wells have increased 70% over traditional fracking techniques. Jason Pygott, Vice President of Operations for Chesapeake, which is headquartered in Oklahoma City, said during the presentation, quote, "What we are doing is unleashing hell on every gas molecule downhole," end quote. So thanks to OPEC, our technology, our service firms, our companies are able to stop and pause, and ultimately they're going to unleash and are unleashing hell. And that means higher production. That means they have wells that they can turn on that have already been produced, right? And so as we see that uptick, it'll be interesting to see with the prices, because there's a lot of production that can follow that tail. And most of that, and many of that, is being led by companies right here in Oklahoma City who are defining that technology. Here in Oklahoma, the scoop in the stack, which if you haven't heard about, I'm sure you will a lot. There's over $5 billion in total investment right here in Oklahoma. So in this environment, it has attracted a lot of capital. 2 weeks ago, GE opened up its global oil and gas technology center, the first focused on just one industry right here in Oklahoma City. So even, and I'll close with this, in a time of uncertainty in energy economy, with political change coming across the nation in one form or another in just a few short days at the ballot box, Oklahoma, regardless of the circumstance, is working hard to attract continued investment, capital, spur innovation, so our future energy economy right now today can be built for tomorrow's future energy economy for our state and our nation. And let me end my remarks with a quote from Will Rogers. He says, quote, "Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you're just sitting there." Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Very interesting remarks. What my takeaway is that it's time now to buy up those sand pits. If you haven't already got yours, they're going to be all gone. Now, I want to thank all of the speakers for this opening session. We have a plenary coming right up, but first let's thank these speakers. And with that, I would invite Christine Tezak and the next panelists to come right to the fore, and we'll have the next session right here. Thank you.
ready to project. There we go. Now the guy in the back has got the sound. Good morning, everybody. I'm Christy Tezak. I'm with Clearview Energy Partners. We're a small research firm in Washington, D.C. that attempts to help institutional investors and corporate strategists understand how legislation, regulation, and politics impact publicly traded companies and the investments in their portfolio. I'm very pleased to have been asked to help moderate a discussion about the energy bill that's currently pending on Capitol Hill, and we are very fortunate to have two of the people who are managing that unwieldy process on the Senate side join us this morning. And if you ever wanted to know how much USAEE has swag, it takes a lot to get somebody who doesn't have any free time as it is to give up part of their weekend to come all the way out here to Tulsa to be here with you on a Monday morning. So I'd like to just, on behalf of everybody here, thank you both for making the time to come down here. Angela Becker-Dittman is with Democratic staff. She works with Ranking Member Maria Cantwell. She's been on the Hill twice, and so she's back and forth, and she brings a depth of experience that we'll talk about coming forward, and I'll ask her to give a couple extra minutes to introduce herself, and she can share with you a little bit about her background and the issues she cares about most. We're also joined by Colin Hayes, who works on Senator Murkowski's staff. Senator Murkowski, of course, is the chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee on the Senate side. And he, too, is a long-standing veteran of Capitol Hill and negotiations to move forward legislation as we get it there. So what I'm going to do is, in the spirit of the gallantry that I always experience down here in Oklahoma, we're going to let Angela go first and say a few more words about about the energy bill and herself first, and sort of what approach your side of the committee is bringing towards the bill that's now pending.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for the invitation to join you guys down here this week. It's really nice to actually get out of what we like to call the other Washington, coming from Washington State. As Christy mentioned, it's my second tour of duty on Capitol Hill. I spent the years 2001 to 2006 with Senator Cantwell in her personal office. During that time, she came into office basically in the middle of the Western energy crisis. If you will remember the rolling blackouts and brownouts in California and the subsequent big mess at FERC, she plunged right into the deep end. We plunged right into the deep end on that at the outset of her term. We were junior members of the committee in the run-up to the 2005 energy bill. As you'll recall, the Senate flipped in 2007, and at that time I went on to join the committee staff of Senator Jeff Bingaman from New Mexico, and that was a fantastic experience. I left the Hill in about 2009, was in the private sector for a bit, doing some consulting work with clean energy technology companies, and then I finally made my way back to the West Coast, joined the staff of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory working on business partnerships and policy development, and thought I'd put down roots back on the West Coast when the dominoes fell in the Senate and the junior senator from Washington somehow convinced me to move back. So it has been a great pleasure actually working with Colin and Senator Murkowski. At the outset of this Congress, we sort of, put a goal up on the wall for ourselves to see if we could actually make some progress. There had been energy efficiency legislation kicking around the Senate for, I guess, 2 or 3 years prior, perhaps even 4. I like to joke that I moved to Seattle and back while the Shaheen Portman energy efficiency language has been pending. And so we just decided to approach this as opposed to focusing on what it is we disagree on, we would set aside our disagreements arguing about what our favorite color of electron might be, and see if we couldn't actually move forward. We used very much sort of the quadrennial energy review put forward by the Department of Energy and the Secretary Moniz as our guide, and I think the overarching theme as part of the energy legislation we've developed has been to focus on the infrastructure investments that we're going to need in an uncertain future as it relates to the generating fleet and the broader dynamics in energy markets. So with that, I'll kick it over to Colin.
Yeah, I want to say thank you also for inviting Angela and I to be here today. talk about. I think the sort of umbrella theme for our chat is the Republican and Dem parties, sometimes opposing, sometimes similar views regarding the future of energy policy. Not unlike Angela in terms of my background, I've bounced around a bit. I started on the Hill in 2003, working for then Chairman Pete Domenici from New Mexico. Worked for him through completion of the 2005 Energy Policy Act, and then went to work for Senator Thomas from Wyoming. When he passed away, I went back to work for Domenici. When he retired, Senator Murkowski, who's now serving as chairman, kept me around. I worked for her for about 5 years when she was ranking member of the committee, left for a year, and when the same set of dominoes fell and Senator Murkowski became chairman, I had a conversation with her about coming back, and for better or for worse, agreed to do that. And then we're now about 2 years into this adventure, and working hard and having some small amount of fun. I was speaking with someone last night who pointed out to me that most folks, even a number of folks attending this conference, don't know that we're assembling an energy bill for the first time in about a decade, and that I ought to spend some time, as Angela has, sort of walking through the backstory on that whole exercise. Angela's characterized it very accurately. We started this Congress, Chairman Murkowski and Ranking Member Cantwell did, with an agreement to find areas of agreement and avoid areas of disagreement. So we've not assembled a cap and trade bill for a county-wide emissions permit trading, nor have we authorized drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But as it turns out, there is a lot of common ground that remains for a Republican from Alaska and a Democrat from Washington State to legislate on energy policy. I'm reminded of, we started this effort to craft a bipartisan energy bill in the Senate right out of the gate, and it was a trying time, really. I mean, we were simultaneously asked to be on the Senate floor, Senator Cantwell and Senator Murkowski managing the advancement of legislation to authorize the Keystone XL pipeline, which is not a unifying experience. And we were asked to take a bill to the floor and manage it earlier in a Congress than anyone had ever gone to the floor. And so while all the other committees were organizing and setting their budgets and determining which members would serve on what subcommittees, we were holding markups on a fairly divisive topic and then headed to the floor. And that, it wasn't particularly pleasant. I mean, you knew the outcome going into it. You knew the votes were there to pass the bill in the Senate, and the votes were there to pass it in the House, and you knew it would ultimately be vetoed, and you knew the votes weren't there to override the veto. And so it was, as are most things in D.C., sort of predetermined theater, but intense and stressful nonetheless. I look back on it as a very useful exercise, though. I mean, there's been a lot of trust that Chairman Murkowski and Ranking Member Cantwell have earned from one another. And to start this Congress with that experience was pretty formative. But Angela's point about finding areas of agreement and avoiding areas of disagreement and deciding that we were, in fact, going to legislate on energy and environmental issues, one of the first things we did, we convened a series of listening sessions in Washington, D.C., and in Washington State, and in Alaska, in rooms not unlike this, although we were on maybe a slightly less elevated perch, to hear from people. We just took a lot of notes, and we met with trade associations, we met with environmental groups, we met with constituents in our boss's states, to hear from them and sort of crowdsource the effort with ideas about what we ought to at least attempt to legislate on. And I probably shouldn't, I think if we'd asked the question at every one of those listening sessions, the experience would have been the same. But Angela and I went to one. There were probably about 100 people there, and we asked the question. We asked for a show of hands who thought Chairman Murkowski and Ranking-Member Cantwell could do it. That in an era where conversations about environmental policy and energy policy are as divisive and polarized as they are, who thought that our two bosses could legislate? And there were like 5 people out of 100 who raised their hands. And you know, I think for both of us, that became the thing you put on the locker room wall, and it gave us a real chip on our shoulder. And for both of our bosses, it really motivated them to prove people wrong, that we're not in a situation where people are consistently incapable of agreeing with one another, consistently incapable of compromising, consistently incapable of cutting deals. And we'll get into the details here, I hope, this morning, in terms of what we're doing within the context of the bill writing, why we're doing it, the way we're doing it. But that's sort of the mentality that we've brought to bear on this effort that, as I said, I think a lot of folks haven't even heard about in many ways, because we're not responding to an energy crisis, because energy prices, as I know will be discussed a lot at this conference, are relatively low. And it's, we're not done yet, but we are much further along than the 95 out of 100 thought we would ever get. And so we're committed to pushing this thing across the finish line. And again, I thank you guys for inviting us to be here, and hopefully we have a chance in response to the questions you've got to flesh out what's in the bill and what we do with the committee.
Terrific. Well, you could have counted me as one of those 5. And not only because of who both Senator Murkowski and Senator Cantwell are, but also because there's actually been a very long-standing tradition of bipartisan cooperation up in the Senate with Senator Bingaman and Senator Domenici. We're long known as two gentlemen who could work together, not only because maybe they had to fly home together most weekends, but one of the things that I wanted to start with is, and sort of get the elephant in the room and then move on to details, is, you know, given the bipartisanship that was clearly in evidence with an 85-12 vote to move the bill forward to conference in July. I'd like to start with Angela and then go to Colin to get a sense of what do you see as some of the challenges to taking a bill that's actually quite bipartisan and then bringing it to conference procedurally with one that we will say was developed with a slightly different agenda.
Right. The challenges. Yeah, so Senator Cantwell would say one of the reasons we were successful, although we were on the floor for 3.5 months, the best 3.5 months of our lives, you know, contending with more than, 90-some amendments throughout the entire process. One of the reasons we were successful is that we sat down and we worked through so many issues and found common ground on ones that were very challenging. I think just because the rules of procedure in the House of Representatives are so different, the majority basically has its way with any piece of legislation. Compromise isn't required to pass anything out of the House of Representatives, which is not the same in the United States Senate. So the House kind of, in my estimation, stapled together a bunch of pieces of legislation where they hadn't worked through a lot of the most difficult issues. So as we approached this conference, it became very important for my boss and our caucus on the Democratic side to have the outlines of an agreement in place with the chairman of the Natural Resources and the Energy and Commerce Committee on the House side, that we all shared the same goal, which was to deliver a conference report to the president's desk that would not be vetoed. And because the White House had issued statements of administration policy on each of the individual pieces of the legislation that the House sent us, so we had a pretty good idea of what those parameters could be. So that was really our guiding principle in approaching these conversations. I think we'll see how that all comes to pass. I think in our negotiations thus far, without saying too much, we have hewed to those parameters. Having worked for Senator Bingaman, one of his guiding principles was always judge a bill for what's in it as opposed to what's not. And we'll see, and I think we've taken that approach in the Senate. As Colin mentioned we don't have a carbon price, but we also don't have drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We don't have everything for everybody by any stretch of the imagination. But we will see whether our House colleagues on both sides of the aisle can come to the same view as it relates to whether it's worthwhile moving forward on legislation that makes important, albeit in some cases incremental improvements in the policy landscape. My boss is looking at this very much as we've had a number of policy proposals kicking around the nation's capital for the last 6 years or so, and it's time to clear the decks and move on. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I guess we're certainly at the most difficult stage of this. It's certainly most complicated because you have not one chamber but two chambers. You have not one chairman and one ranking member, but 5 committees whose jurisdiction is implicated in the House of Representatives. They don't handle conference committees the way the Senate does, so we have multiple chairmen and multiple ranking members who are understandably territorial about involving themselves and their staff in these negotiations. But to give some context, I'll go sort of quickly through our stat line here. So we, at the beginning of the Congress, had listening sessions with affected stakeholders. Then Chairman Murkowski and Ranking Member Cantwell told every member of the Senate that the time had come to get their bills introduced if they wanted the committee to consider them in any way, shape, or form. That shook loose 114 separate standalone bills. Just 114. And there were, I'm sure, some brilliant ideas that would have been the 115th, 16th, and 17th, but we imposed a deadline on folks and said, look, if we are going to abide by regular order, if your bill is not introduced and it does not have a legislative hearing, good luck to you. You'll lose votes, whether you bring those ideas up as amendments in committee or on the floor. And we pretty much stuck to that. I mean, folks who did not get with the program were at a very real disadvantage in terms of having their ideas put on the table and considered on a bipartisan basis. We had 114 bills introduced. We held very unwieldy, admittedly unwieldy legislative hearings, but legislative hearings nonetheless on every single one of them. Subsequent to that, we locked ourselves in a room for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, very long days, very consequential negotiations. Once you got past all the stuff that everyone in their right mind would agree to, there are a lot of deals that were cut, a lot of compromises that we engaged in. All that work formed the basis of what you call chairman's mark. In this case, it was a bipartisan chairman's mark that was put before the members of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and we marked it up. And that just made, instead of members showing up and sitting around the dais of the committee talking, they show up and they've got amendments. And I forget the exact number of amendments that were considered, but we bumped up against 100. We had dozens and dozens that were pulled in from members of the committee, either on votes or on the basis of further negotiation to come up with something that could be, as we call it, cleared and come in with basically the consent of the committee. And then we reported the bill out, and I knew we were off to a good start. Our joke is that even the opposition to the bill was bipartisan. It passed. It passed. The committee has 22 members, 12 Republicans and 10 Dems. When we put the final product to a vote of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, we had 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans that voted no. And I was actually really proud of that. Most other committees were reporting things out on party line votes, and we were not. At that point, we waited. There was the government was in danger of shutting down at the end of 2015. And it would have been a little bit tone deaf for our bosses to be insisting on floor time with all that going on. Because, of course, that's the next step, is to go to the floor. And so we had to wait, and we waited until really the beginning of this year to head over to the floor. We thought we'd be there for a week, the best laid plans. And then and we were doing a very good job. We were working very full days. That's a good sign when you're over on the floor. If you have sort of installments, you get through some things in the morning, get through some things in the afternoon, and then if you really push, sometimes you can clear additional limits at night. We really had gotten up ahead of steam, and then this very unfortunate situation in Flint, Michigan, became a part of the conversation we were having about the energy bill. And Senator Stabenow and Senator Peters exercised what is the right of any member in the Senate, and they shut us down. And their entire conference had their back, and Senator McConnell lost patience. He filed cloture on the bill, he put it to a vote to try to end debate, and we didn't have the votes to end debate because we had not worked out a deal to address the situation in Flint, Michigan. At that point, we sort of got drop kicked off the floor. They moved on to other things, and we were written off by a lot of folks for debt. It just happens throughout this process. But we kept working, and we kept working in good faith with the Michigan delegation in particular. And ultimately, the desire to see something done on Flint was eliminated as an obstacle to completing work on the energy bill. But of course, in the process of seeing it go away, Senator Murkowski and Senator Cantwell had made a number of commitments that they're living up to, including having a program that falls within our jurisdiction, the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Program, used as a pay-for to cover the costs associated with the legislative response for the package that's being put forward to address the issues in Flint, Michigan, and as it turns out, a lot of communities in the United States with drinking water problems. But we ultimately got out from under that challenge, and the bill passed the Senate on an 85-12 vote. That was a slightly less proud moment for me as the Republican staff director, because the 12 no votes were all Republicans.
I keep telling you can count Bernie.
Yeah.
He just wasn't there.
Yeah. Senator Sanders was otherwise occupied, but yes, I'm pretty confident he would have no if he'd been there. That would have been a better stat line for me. But, you play the hand you're dealt, and I think for Senator Cantwell, it was very important to have all her colleagues on board. For Senator Murkowski, she was willing to see some of her Republican colleagues part ways in terms of how we structured the bill, and so that was the outcome. Was an 85-12 vote, as you described, Christy, and that was a good moment for us. And then we sent over to the House, and they responded, and they responded with a predictably partisan piece of legislation. And that made our lives difficult, because what you need to understand about a conference committee, which is the stage of the game we're in, is that there are really no rules. You can negotiate the reconciling of the House and Senate bills however you choose. And in this case in particular, the House and Senate take turns chairing conferences, and in this case it was the Senate's turn to chair an energy conference. And so that's a lot of discretion available to Senator Murkowski as chairman, not only of the committee that authored the Senate legislation in the first place, but the conference committee that's tasked with reconciling the Senate and House positions. There's a lot of flexibility. The only rules that you have to abide by are, one, you have to have one public meeting of the conferees. We've got 47 conferees, by the way, which does not make this any easier. 40 from the House and 7 from the Senate. And when you produce a conference report, which is the document, the bill that represents the efforts of the conference committee to reconcile the two different bills, you only need a majority of the House conferees and a majority of the Senate conferees to sign. And then, at that point, you have a privileged bill, which is a big deal in the Senate. I mean, you're all familiar with the filibuster in the Senate and needing 60 votes to blow your